Thank you all for your patience whilst everyone's joining. On behalf of Elifelet and the Consortium for Israel and the Asylum Seekers, welcome to Building Blocks for the Future, a conference on the education of statusless children in Israel. Especially after the postponement due to the security situation, we are very happy to have everyone with us today to hear the story of 10,000 children living in Israel without legal status. My name is Tamara Newman, and I'm the Director of Strategic Partnerships at Elifelet. I have lived in Israel for the last 8 years, throughout which I have been deeply involved in the struggle for the rights of the refugee community in Israel. With us today, we have attendees from Israel, the US, the UK, and Europe. We have a great lineup of speakers ahead for the next hour, and we'll hold a question and answer session at the end. If you do have questions throughout the webinar, please write in the question and answer box and state if it's for one of the specific speakers. We will try to address as many of the questions as possible at the end. And now I'm excited to introduce our first speaker, Julie Fisher. Julie arrived in Israel with her husband, Daniel Shapiro, and their children in 2011. In her role as the spouse of the US ambassador, she engaged with the social sector in Israel and globally and supported the programming of the US Embassy. She's a trained educator and soon began to volunteer with children in a small daycare center in South Tel Aviv. After years of volunteering in the community, she founded the Consortium for Israel and the Asylum Seekers with the purpose of bringing greater attention to the plight of asylum seekers in Israel. Julie.
Hi, thanks for joining us to learn about statusless children in Israel. The work I do with refugees and asylum seekers is very personal for me. In our history, and in many of our histories, and our very recent history, for some of us, we were refugees ourselves. My real world introduction to refugees began long ago in Minnesota, where I grew up. One snowy night, my parents, my sister, and I drove to the airport to meet a family of Vietnamese refugees. Our local Jewish community sponsored the family and assisted them as they became Americans, settling into their new, safe lives thousands of miles away from anything familiar. Fast forward to my first year in Israel, when I met another refugee, a young Eritrean woman who had just arrived in Tel Aviv after being kidnapped from a refugee camp in Africa, trafficked through the Sinai Desert, where she was ransomed, tortured, and dumped not far from Israel's border. IDF soldiers saved her life as she fled gunfire from Egyptian soldiers. This young woman rolled up her sleeves to show me the scars on her arms from what she endured. My life in Israel took me far from my roots as an educator, and I yearned to find a new way to contribute. One day, early in our time here, I took a tour of Tel Aviv that included a visit to a dingy, dark, overcrowded room filled to the brim with babies and toddlers called a babysitter. It wasn't a pretty picture, but there was something very beautiful that I saw in that darkness. I saw Elifelet volunteers, Israelis, neighbors. It was my first view of Israeli neighbors helping African asylum seekers. Israelis trying to repair and strengthen the fabric of society, honoring and celebrating the differences in religion and culture between themselves and their neighbors, finding ways to support the vulnerable families in their neighborhoods who were far from what was familiar. My teenage daughter and I began volunteering with Elifelet once a week. We looked forward to our trips to South Tel Aviv. It was time out of our diplomatic bubble, time that my daughter and I spent together, bringing some happiness and fun into the lives of dozens of babies and toddlers who spent entire days in an overcrowded room with little to no adult attention. We sang songs, read books, snuggled the babies, danced in bubbles with the toddlers. But then I started asking questions about these sweet babies and toddlers. What would happen to them? How can we keep them healthy and safe? How can we get them ready for preschool? What tools will they need to succeed? And every week after we were done with our volunteering, we would get into our car and drive 20 minutes into a completely different world. Soon, we began to connect others in the diplomatic and international community with the organizations we encountered in South Tel Aviv, so they could visit and learn and volunteer. And one of our favorite projects was making badly needed safety repairs in the child care centers, where we could clearly see that our work was making a difference, and we hoped actually making lives safer. Groups would join for a day of painting, putting up baby gates, installing smoke alarms, fixing broken windows, and seeing how impactful a day of donating their time could be in the lives of small children with few people to advocate for them. My time volunteering in that tiny dark room filled with sweet children led me down a path to start the Consortium for Israel and Asylum Seekers several years later. Now we work to provide humanitarian support, match volunteers and donors to organizations such as Elifelet and others, and educate individuals and groups about asylum seekers and refugees in Israel. I'll always be indebted to the introduction I received from Elifelet to the impactful work being done to help vulnerable children. I am inspired by the acts of kindness that take place every day and by those who have committed their lives to helping those less fortunate. It's the bright part of what is often a painful, sad story. I invite you to join us and our friends at Elifelet to meet asylum seekers who fled genocide and persecution, seeking safety for themselves and their children. I invite you to meet inspiring Israeli and international partners, many of whom are on this call. Thank you. Thank you for joining us to learn more, for sharing our values of strengthening the fabric of Israeli society. Thank you for supporting the most vulnerable members of this community, the children we are focusing on today, whose futures can be very bright. I'm now honored to introduce our next speaker, former Knesset member, Michal Rozin. Michal served in the 19th, 20th, and 21st Knesset from 2013 to 2019. She was the chair of the Committee for Migrant Workers and has been a fearless ally of the refugee and migrant communities in Israel. Thank you for joining us, Michal.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Julie, for everything you said right now and what you did over the years. It's amazing and it's so important. Israel has two core humanitarian obligations to refugees and their children: to protect refugees fleeing a cruel fate and danger in their country, and the second, the protection of children. Israel has officially signed two international treaties, the Refugee Convention and the Convention on the Rights of the Child. In 1951, after World War II and the Holocaust, Israel is proudly one of the first signatories to Refugee Convention. This convention outlined that countries have an obligation to provide protection to people within its border who have a well-founded fear that their life will be in danger if they are returned to their home countries. But at that time, they could never imagine that one day there would be non-Jewish refugees fleeing persecution that will arrive in Israel to ask us for protection. From the first day I walked through Saharonim prison, to which the refugees who crossed the Egyptian border were brought, I was shocked to see the families imprisoned with their children. And later the difficult encounter with the phenomenon of the children's warehouses, what we call the babysitters. We have come a long way since then. Some nurseries and daycare centers were established and schools for refugee children. However, there is still a long way to go, and we have a heavy commitment to invest in the well-being and development of children. Israel enjoys expectance in the worldwide community of liberal democracies. Being a part of this community required us to stand by our obligation to UN conventions. And even when the circumstances prove challenging, and much more than that, we have a moral obligation to this community, and even more so for their children. Bearing in mind that, as indicated in the Declaration of the Rights of the Child, by reason of his physical and mental immaturity, needs special safeguards and care, including appropriate legal protection before as well as after birth. Considering that the child should be fully prepared to live an individual life in society and brought up in the spirit of the ideals proclaimed in the Charter of the United Nations, and in particular in the spirit of peace, dignity, tolerance, freedom, equality, and solidarity, as it says in the convention. But there is also a pragmatic reasoning to address their needs. These children are not only refugees and migrants, they are first-generation Israelis. The state of Israel is the only home they have known, and most likely the only home they will know. Acting like they don't exist is damaging, not only to the children and their families, but to all of us. Like all children, we need to invest in their education, development, so that they will become functioning, contributing, and thriving members of society. Our entire country is weakened when we leave one social group behind. Beyond just ensuring that they are not left behind, we stand to benefit from embracing the community. Having diversity around us makes us all richer. The concept of diversity encompasses acceptance and respect. It means understanding that each individual is unique and recognizing our individual differences. Differences that teach us to be more open, patient, accepting. These are qualities that all of Israelis could benefit from. During my time as my term as member of Knesset and until today, I've worked closely with the civil society organization that work for the rights of the refugee and migrant communities. These organizations are the pride of this country. We have worked together with the refugee community, building trust and partnership. Together, we have been on a journey that is equally about the rights of the refugees as it is about the humanity, dignity, and the future of the state of Israel. So thank you for listening, to being with us, and together we will change reality. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michal, for being here tonight, for being here always, and for everything that you do. A few years ago on Yom Kippur, I found myself walking in South Tel Aviv. On the holiest day on Jewish calendar, when cars do not drive on the streets, kids, like most part of the country, kids were taking over the streets, riding bicycles and playing on the road. In a very rare Yom Kippur occurrence, a car came through the street, cautiously trying to get through. And a group of teenagers, Sudanese, Eritreans, Filipinos, they started yelling in Hebrew, "It's Yom Kippur, what are you doing? Get off the road, Yom Kippur." What I love about this anecdote is not just that this group of teenagers saw themselves as defenders of Yom Kippur, but that they also began yelling with such chutzpah at the people in the car who most likely had some kind of emergency situation. These teenagers may not have been Jewish, but they are certainly Israeli. And these teenagers are amongst the 10,000 children in Israel without legal status. I'm going to take you now through the story of how this came to be and what status and rights they do and don't have. Over the last 20 years, there has been a few hundreds of children without legal status, who are mostly children of migrant workers who originally came to Israel on work visas, and then they ended up having children here. However, the much newer group are the children of asylum seekers. Between 2006 and 2012, asylum seekers arrived in Israel. They came by foot through the Sinai Desert and arrived on the Israel-Egypt border. They were predominantly fleeing two crisis situations, the genocide in Darfur, Sudan, and the dictatorship in Eritrea, where people fled political persecution, slave labor, and arbitrary imprisonment in torturous conditions. Over 6 years, 65,000 asylum seekers arrived. And in 2012, the border closed, and asylum seekers stopped arriving. Of those 65,000, there are only 30,000, less than half, still in the country today. And although we use the word asylum seekers and refugees, we are not talking about new arrivals. We are talking about people who have been in the country for 10 to 15 years, who work, pay taxes, speak Hebrew, have established their own community organizations and leadership councils, and of course, have started families. Unfortunately, unlike in the US, where being born on US soil automatically translates to citizenship, that is not the case here. Approximately 7,000 children have been born to asylum seekers in Israel over the last decade. Never has Israel had a whole child population growing up without legal status. This is unprecedented and brand new, and it poses new questions and challenges for the education system, the NGOs, the municipalities, and the community themselves. So what does life look like in terms of status and rights? Sudanese and Eritreans have what is called group protection. It means that they will not be forcibly returned to their countries of origin. On one hand, this is a clear acknowledgement that return to their country puts them in grave danger. On the other hand, this has not translated into refugee status or even into a form of residency status. They are simply allowed to be here. They are not facing deportation. They are not living under the radar. They are very much living their lives legally. However, the threat that tomorrow the policy could change is always a possibility, and the uncertainty of a secure future is a constant in their lives. In terms of work, asylum seekers in Israel work legally, and they work very hard. They have filled a huge gap in the labor market in the hospitality industry, in restaurants and hotels, and have been completely essential to Tel Aviv's tourist boom over the last decade. In terms of rights, though, they do not fall under the national health law or the national insurance law, Bitoach Leumi, for those who are familiar. The statusless community, including the children who are born here, have no automatic health insurance. In Israel, this is an anomaly, where the public health system is generally very strong. There is a basic package of insurance that statusless children, parents can take out. And thanks to our colleagues at Physicians for Human Rights, who have spent many years encouraging parents to insure their children, a considerable portion of the community have insured their children. However, the corona pandemic has financially devastated the community, and most were unable to keep up those payments over the last year. It will take a long time for the community to recover from this. Not being under the national insurance law also means that they have no access to unemployment support, tax deductions for single parents, or disability support. This has been particularly hard over the last year. So much of the community lost their jobs as restaurants and hotels closed. And unlike Israelis, there was just simply no financial assistance from the government. Thankfully, we are now recovering from this terrible period. Israel's recovery from the corona has been a big relief to the refugee community. And importantly, all of the status community has also had access to free corona vaccines. The most important right that the community does have is the right to education. Israel's law on compulsory education is applied to all children, regardless of legal status. However, public education starts at the age of 3 when the kids enter municipality kindergarten. And this has left a problematic gap from ages 0 to 3. Furthermore, the failure to implement any policy during the years of arrival led to the great majority of asylum seekers settling in South Tel Aviv. Whilst on one hand, this helped develop a strong sense of community and a mini economy of restaurants, hair salons, and shops, it also created a lot of social tension in South Tel Aviv. Positively, today, 50% of the adult community have left Tel Aviv. However, 70% of the children remain in Tel Aviv. This has been challenging for the Tel Aviv municipality, who are tasked with educating the children. They are responsible to provide education for a new generation of children in South Tel Aviv. And in building new campuses, the children have ended up in preschools and schools separate from their Israeli peers. This is something we're working to address together with partner organizations. Of the 10,000 statusless children, 7,000 are below the age of 9. To explain what this looks like, of the 4 main schools in Tel Aviv where the children learn, there are 2 classes that will graduate from year 12 this year. But there are 21 classes of first graders. So this generation is just coming up through the school system now. And the schools, educators, and NGOs, we are figuring out how to meet their complex needs. Our chance to interrupt what often becomes an intergenerational chain of disadvantage is now. The time to make a difference in their lives is now. Our aim is to provide them with the nurturing support, educational assistance, and creative opportunities so that the children can have a happy childhood and a fulfilling life. I'm now going to hand over to my colleague, Noah Gluskinos, the director of Elifelet's Early Childhood Program, and she's going to speak about one of the serious barriers to creating that happy and safe childhood, the gap of ages 0 to 3. Noah.
Sorry. Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? So I'm Noah, and I'm the director of the Early Childhood Program in Elifelet. And I've been working with the community of asylum seekers for the past 5 or 6 years. Before in another NGO in Be'er Sheva called the Negev Refugee Center. And today I want to take you into the complicated and fascinating world of the babysitters and the 3 first years of many asylum seekers' children's life. And why is it even important to speak about those years? We believe that the first 3 years of a child's life is a crucial state for its development. This is the stage where a child develops its skills, its connection with other people, and its personality and the trust that he has in the world. And research shows that if we as adults and educators invest more in those 3 first years of life, children will have a better skills and mental health and social welfare in the world when they grow to be adults. Just in a general note, in Israel, the early childhood education until 3 years old is not mandatory and is not regulated by the state until now. It might change a bit. So it means that the daycares are very costly and they're private, which means that for our population, the statusless parents, they cannot send their children to this kind of costly daycares, even with the subsidies for families with low income. It doesn't really help them. They're not included in that. And that leaves statusless children with very different options to start their life than Israeli children. So if you're a statusless child in Israel, your options when it's 0 to 3 is either to go to an unregistered babysitter, which I will soon explain exactly what it is and how it looks like. In Tel Aviv, there are approximately 40 babysitters. There were many more before the corona. Almost 50% of them closed during the first lockdown because of debts. Those babysitters are very cheap and they operate for long hours, even from 5 in the morning until 7, 8 in the evening. So they allow the parents to work the long hours that they need to work. The other option that serves 30% of the children, while the rest, the other 70% are in the unregistered babysitters, is the UNITAF model daycares. These are authorized daycares that operate by 2 NGOs, UNITAF and Asova. Those places have very good standards for the daycare, but they have limited places and they are now full completely. Even for September, there are waiting lists. So the children who are now in the babysitters don't really have other alternative where to go to, even if they find a place that is cheap and the parents can afford themselves. Right now, they don't have any other alternative because the places are just full. When they reach the age of 3 years old, they go to the municipal kindergarten and then they start the Israeli education by Israeli programs. But the problem is that the kindergarten ends at around 2 o'clock or 4 o'clock, and for the parents it's just not enough. And then the kids who grew up in the babysitters will usually keep coming to the babysitter as a solution for the afternoon hours. So it means that in the afternoon, those babysitters are getting even more crowded and accumulate more children in a very wide range of ages. But there's also an alternative with the UNICEF after schools that also accumulate children. But again, it's not enough for all of the children who live here in Tel Aviv. So what is a babysitter? How does it look like? I'm seeing this every day, at least two. So I'm kind of used to it, but I know it's a very strange sight for people who don't go there every day. It doesn't look like Israel or what you would imagine a kindergarten looks like in Israel or any Western state. Those kindergartens are basically improvised daycares that started in apartments in South Tel Aviv, operated by West African work immigrants who just started opening their houses for children to accommodate them during the long hours that their parents are working. And this improvised solution grew and became a whole system of taking care of thousands of children during the first 3 years of their life. So we are used to hearing a babysitter as a term of someone taking care of children for a few hours. Here, the children can stay in the babysitter for 12 hours. And as you see here in the picture, there are many cradles, one next to another. And a lot of babies can be in those cradles for many hours and not even go out to crawl on the floor. This is because the babysitters are very crowded and there are not enough adults per children. So the take carers, who are called aunties, are mostly changing diapers and feeding the whole day. They cannot do anything else for the benefit of the children. So we see children that are from a few months to 3 years old don't do any activity. It starts with crawling, and when they're older, they don't draw, they don't put stickers, they don't sing songs, they don't read books. All the usual things that you imagine that children do in the kindergarten, they just don't have it. They sometimes don't even have toys. You can come to a babysitter's and see 30 children sitting on the floor, maybe watching television, maybe even not, just sitting on the floor and wandering around in the room. So a babysitter is not a usual kindergarten. It's a place where we don't want the children to be in, but unfortunately, that's the solution for them right now. And this is why we are there and trying to support the children wherever they are. Of course, growing up in this situation ends up with a lot of children that have a lot of developmental issues. The most common one that we see is speech delays, because children are not getting exposed to one correct structure of language. So we see kids who are 3 years old and cannot speak at all. We also see a lot of motor development issues because children couldn't crawl enough and didn't have enough time to develop their muscles. We also see cognitive delays because children didn't have enough stimuli for the brain. And I think the thing that I see the most, and it hurts the most, is the emotional and behavioral impact that it has on the children. Because when a child doesn't have a stable connection with an adult, and when he's not sure that the world is a safe place for him, and that the adults around him will provide him what he needs, it affects deeply on how he sees the world, on his personality, and on his connection with other people and his trust. And we see a lot of children with emotional problem like anger management issues, or kids who are closing and shutting down from the world and don't express their needs. And it's something that keeps going with them for the rest of their life. It doesn't end up when they are 3 years old and are going to the municipal kindergarten. So what are we doing there in all this chaotic world of the babysitters? The most important thing that we do is operating with a group of 30 very dedicated volunteers who come every week to the same kindergarten and are doing amazing activities with the children. They develop a stable and safe connection with them. They're trying to bring them as much developmental stimuli and activities that will help them develop better, and just bring them things that normal kids are doing, as you see in the pictures, and that otherwise the children in the babysitter will just not have. We're working in 8 babysitters with those volunteers. We also supply food, toys, and repairs for the structure, dealing with a lot of safety issues in those apartments. We also have a therapeutic program that does emotional therapy in 2 babysitters, and the professional dance and music class in 4 of the babysitters. And although it's a drop in the sea, and it's only, you can say it's 4 hours or 6 hours that those children are getting something else, I think it means the world to them. And I know that when they'll grow up, something from what we do now will stay in their hearts. And for me, it means the world. Thank you for listening.
אנחנו הגענו לישראל ברגל, מאריתריאה לאתיופיה, לסודאן ואז לישראל. והגענו עם הרבה אנשים. וחצי טבעו בים, חצי חיו. ואני ילדה קטנה בת שנה, שנתיים, ואני הלכתי חצי ברגל וחצי שמו אותי בגן. פעם הייתה אישה, כאילו זקנה, פעם כל יום שהייתי עוברת הייתה אומרת לי עכבר שחור. ואז כל פעם הייתה אומרת לי, ואז התעצבנתי, ואמרתי לה פעם אחת, אמרתי לה עם עכבר לבן. ואז זה לא הרגיש לי נוח בלב, זה לא הרגיש לי נוח.
שלום לכולם. מוכנים?
אני הרוב כזה בבית לבד, בלי ההורים באים ב-11, לפעמים ב-10, אז אני נשאר בבית ורואה טלוויזיה. זה נראה כיף כי אתה כזה בלי ההורים, אתה יכול, אם בא לך עד תישון וכל זה, אתה יכול לשחק עד איזה שעה שבא לך, עד שההורים יגיעו וכל זה, אבל בלב אתה בודד. לפעמים אני חולם חלומות. פעם אחת חלמתי שההורים שלי ואחותי באותו מקום וטסנו לקנדה כבר וכל מיני. יש לי קרוב משפחה שהיא טסה גם, ואחר כך מי שנשארה לי בקו. אחר כך גם בקו טסה, אז לא נשארו לי קרובי משפחה. אחר כך דג'אן טס, שזה בין החברים הכי טובים שלי. אז נשארתי בודד.
ואני פה מתוך בחירה, כי למצוא עבודה בהוראה אפשר בכל מקום. אבל יש משהו בבית ספר הזה שאתה לא יכול לנטוש. הם מספיק נטשו אותם. כל הזמן אני מרגישה שאני צריכה להגן עליהם, בהרבה מאוד תחומים. ולהילחם, אני הרבה נלחמת. אנחנו מתפקדים כבית ספר רגיל, אבל אנחנו לא בית ספר רגיל. הסיפורים פה, וכל ילד יש לו מסגרת סיפורית שונה וקשה מאוד, מאוד מאוד, של אלימות, של דברים שהם ראו בדרך לכאן, של מה שהם רואים אחרי צהריים, של הבדידות הזאת גם אחרי צהריים, של להיות כמעט בלי הורים בבית, כי הם צריכים לעבוד ולפרנס. כי הם שורדים, הם צריכים לשרוד, והילדים מבינים את זה.
אני כן בקשר עם סבתות שלי, אני מתגעגעת אליהם ואני לא מכירה אותם. להתגעגע מרגיש כאילו אוהבים מישהו ואז בעצם רוצים אותו בחזרה. האמת שהחלומות שלי הפסיקו. פעם אחת חלמתי שיש ארץ שכל אחד יכול לעשות מה שבא לו, וזה היה נחמד. יש חלק ילדים שבודדים כמוני, שמעתי שהתחילו את הבית ספר, הם התחילו להיות מוקפים בחברים. אני חולמת את הדברים מפחידים, אבל אני רוצה לדבר על זה, ואני חולמת להיות שחקנית כדורגל. הם פליטים, ואין להם בית קבוע, ואני מאחלת להם בית קבוע, ובינתיים אני אתן להם את כל האהבה והתמיכה שאני יכולה כדי שיקחו את זה איתם, לשם.
ילדים, אנחנו אוהבים אתכם, אוהבים אתכם.
לראות את האור, לראות את האור.
I moved every time I watched this video. You have now heard directly from some of the kids, and shortly you will also get to hear from an amazing mother. But now I'm very excited to introduce you to Yehuda Friedman, the principal of Hayarden School in Hatikva in South Tel Aviv.
Hi, how are you? Can you hear me? Good evening, good morning. I don't know where you are right now. I'm the principal of this beautiful school. Being a school principal for me is the realization each morning that I know nothing. I just know nothing. Every morning starts new. The faces of the student every morning tell me the complex story of the night they had. No rights, no future, no hope, and no dream. Every morning I have the right to learn about the children and myself, especially about myself, and the opportunity to slightly improve the day of those who have just crossed my path. In the Hayarden School, we are not budgeted according to needs. Hayarden School is a public school, and so it is budgeted, but only in practice, because nothing about it resembles a regular public school in Israel, and the minimal budget does not match the needs of the school. The overall characteristic of the school is special needs, as all of the students in the school have special needs. And maybe, in fact, every one of us here tonight and every one of us in the world have special needs. We do not have a budget to meet special needs, and therefore we are committed to raise funds for this cause. Without money, we will not be able to give our students what they need. But when we do have funds, we are able to give them a healthy and protective surrounding, along with the hope that tomorrow will be a better day. Thank you for listening. It was short, but this is me, and thank you so much for being here.
אני הרכזת של ג' עד ה' במועדונית של אליפלת. הם באים למועדונית אחרי בית הספר, ויש לנו כל מיני פעילויות, כמו חוג חינוך. זה מרגישה עבודה חשובה, שעושים עבודה של שליחות, עם הרבה משמעות, וגם שהילדים מעריכים את זה. חוץ מזה שהם פוגשים גם עוד אנשים מבוגרים שהם לא ההורים שלהם או המורים שלהם, ואז הם לומדים להכיר אנשים שאכפת להם מהם דרך דברים אחרים, ולא רק הבית ספר או הבית. עצוב לי להגיד שאני לא יודעת כמה עתיד יש להם פה בישראל, אבל המטרה שלנו זה לתת להם את הביטחון של כאן ועכשיו.
I had always done volunteer work in the area of stateless people and refugees, refugee status requests. So I went and volunteered for Elifelet. And I've been doing this for almost 4 years. I have a very diverse student population. I have 3 Eritreans, 1 Sudanese. I have a girl who is half Madagascar and half Congo. I have two children who are Nigerians. I have an Indian. They're Israeli in every respect. Their language is Hebrew. Their holidays are the Jewish holidays. The way they play, the way they learn, the way they relate to other people is all Israeli. המורה שלי, היא סיפרה לי שהמוזיקה זה המתנה הגדולה ביותר שאפשר לתת. אבל מה? זו מתנה מיוחדת. כי המוזיקה, אתה מקבל את זה כמתנה, אבל זה לא הופך להיות מתנה אמיתית עד שאתה מעביר את המתנה למישהו אחר. ועכשיו התלמידים שלי הם מעבירים את המוזיקה לכם, ובזה המתנה שהם קיבלו הופכת להיות מתנה אמיתית.
אני עובדת עם המורה שלי 3 שנים. לוקח לי לאט לאט ללמוד איך לנגן. ממש כיף לנגן כינור על הבמה מול המון אנשים.
You get a chance by Elifelet. It's free. I'm very happy about that. I like also to play, but I don't have chance to.
המורה שלי, יואל, לימד אותי את הדברים שאני לא יודעת בכינור, אז הוא לימד אותי ממש טוב. אני רוצה להמשיך לנגן בכינור כל החיים שלי כמעט. רק רציתי לשאול אתכם, אם אתם גם מנגנים בכינור או באיזה סוג של מוזיקה, כמו פיאנו, כמו פסנתר, דברים כאלה, ורק שתדעו שמוזיקה זה החיים.
So that was a taste for you of what goes on at the Elifelet after school program. We have a long waiting list for the program, and we're excited that we are opening more places next year. But one day we hope that every child in the community will have access to such programs. I also just want to tell you that we have over 80 people joining us from all over the world, and thank you so much for being here. And I'm now very excited to introduce you to our next speakers. Sharon Tal, Executive Director of Elifelet, and Simrat Tekle, an Eritrean asylum seeker in Israel, a community leader and activist, and mother. Both women are mothers to 3 boys, challenge enough in itself, but both are busy leading change in and for their communities. Sharon and Simrat. Sharon, you're on mute.
Sorry, now you can hear me. So thank you so much for joining us this evening to hear the story of our work, to hear the story of the children, to hear the story of the families. And one such family is Simlet's family. I met Simlet when she was the director of the Eritrean Women's Center, one of the most amazing community leaders that I've met. Thank you, Simlet, for joining us. Simlet, let's start back home. Let's start with why you left Eritrea.
First of all, thank you for having given the chance. I'm an asylum seeker from Eritrea and I'm a mother of 3 boys. I have been living in Israel for about 11 years. My eldest son, which I born in Eritrea, I left him there. Now he's living in Addis Ababa as a refugee. And I have two born Israel children here. And I'm happy to share why I fled home, why I came to your country. When I completed my high school, I went to the army. I completed my national service, and I passed the matriculation exam, and I joined college. I want to study law and political science in the country. But the government shut down the law and the political science faculties and assigned me to study journalism and mass communication. I studied the field and I graduated in 2007. Again, the government assigned me to work as a journalist in Eritrean Women's Association Party, which is governmental body. I started to work there. During that time, there was many mothers which automatically taken to prison with no reason. For instance, if their husband or their son left the country illegally. Then I raised a question about the women's right. Because of my point of view, the government considered me as a rebel. I hunted by it. I was living for constant fear. In 2008, I was pregnant for my first son. I came able to leave my child when he was 1 month. I stay until 2010. In 2010, I lost hope to treat myself, and I decided to leave Eritrea. And through the hard journey, I came to Israel, and I arrived in Israel in order to get a bright future, dignity, and safety.
Israel, though, when you left Eritrea, you were looking to save yourself, right? You were not heading to Israel. You were looking for a safe place.
Yes, just because when I came to Sudan, I really quickly understand that it's not a safe place. And according to history, as a Christian and in the state of Israel, I have more details. The more close to Sudan, the safer place, the democratic country, a beautiful people, what I heard through their stories. And yeah, I have to go to Israel, and it might be the better place, and I get the safety there. And I start my journey through the Sinai Desert, which is terrible and hard. And I really welcomed the Israel soldiers when I come to the border, and they send me to Saronim. I've been detained for two months there, and then directly I get 2 bus tickets, and I came to the Tel Aviv bus station, and I settled for 11 years in South Tel Aviv.
So you left your son there, and you came and you started a new life, and you became a mother of 2 beautiful boys. And what is it like being a mother to children here in Israel as a refugee?
Yes. In 2011, I get born my first son, and first, I don't know the Israel language. I don't know the culture. Even I don't know the maternity benefits and everything. I get my son in Ihlov, and I don't know how to make an insurance for my child. I don't know to whom to ask, but I got UNITAF as an organization which has helped the community, and I reach them, and then they help me to go to make an insurance. So as a mother, and you don't know what to do, like the basic needs of your son, it makes me like crazy, and I'm very feeling sad. And again, when my children start to join, to have to go to the babysitters, all the babysitter is daily my income to put them in the Israel private kindergartens. I don't know where to put them. And again, I wonder where to put them. And then I went a building, which is a babysitter, and a closed room. And I start one day, and I told her, how I can register in your babysitter? No registration, just put your son here. Then I told my gift my son. And one day when he stayed there, the next day I don't trust the babysitter, and I start working. It was also another challenging. Again, when my son started the municipality kindergarten, the municipality like enrolled a separated kindergarten, which really make me sad. I came for a better life, and my kids to have choices. And again, I feel like inferiority.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So trying to navigate your way to understand what's going on, and trying against all odds to make sure that your children have the future that you want them to have. And you and your husband are both academics, right? He's a teacher and you're a journalist. But most Eritrean families and other asylum seeking families do not even have the privilege that you have. 30% of families are single parent families. What is life like for them?
Yeah. As you said, that we are different from the other community members. Like, I mean, we are the less numbers that we have. I try myself to help my community in South Tel Aviv, but it's a big issue. Like, because it's governmental issue, we can do nothing in South Tel Aviv. Like the community coming together, they try their best, you know. But as Simrat, what I to say for the single mother, first of all, the mothers, they don't know the language. The mothers have low income. The mothers are not treated their traumas and having children here. And the Tel Aviv municipality enroll their kids outside of the residential area. They can pay the transport and they can pay the after school. Even they can pay like the daily needs of their children. Their children is at risk, non-protected. If they didn't get chance after school inside the school, their children is at risk.
So what are their needs? What are their biggest needs?
The community to be settled and to feel like a country, they have to have like status. They are statusless. If you don't have a status, you mean you don't know what will happen tomorrow. You can't plan to learn a language. You can't plan to grow your child in a better way. You just dream to have another country, to be safety, to be protected. All these families are separated from loved ones, like me. They left child behind, and they are not dreaming to have a life here. So anyway, they are living here. They have to get financially help for their children, like to have after school transportation, equal education, and getting child in their neighborhood, not outside of the residential area. If this issue is solved, it might be helped. That's what I think.
Okay. Is there anything else that you'd like to share with us before we continue?
Yes, I share all the problems and difficulties here, but I just want to say thank you for all the audience. They come to hear us, to support us, and to bring solutions. In my experience, the Israel government directly, indirectly pressure us to leave the country. We have unfair treatment as a refuge. This life that I am here in Israel is because of the regular Israeli people and the organizations which stand with us. In 2008, there was deportation and deposit law. This is cancelled because of the Israeli people. We are here with you. We love you. We feel proud of you, and help us to have a bright future and dreams to feel home. That's what I want to say. And then I'm going to share I was living in South Tel Aviv for about 11 years because I don't like South Tel Aviv because of the school separation, the feeling of the neighborhood. I moved to a city of Herzliya a few months ago, and I'm really welcomed here, and so I'm so happy here. I wish my community will feel like me and maybe to have that equal education and spread all over the state. That's what I can say.
We have the same wish. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So this has been an evening filled with information, filled with difficult information and stories, and Simlet's story is really the story of the families struggling in Israel, but also the beautiful side of Israel, of Israelis, of the social sector. So I wanted to lighten the mood up a bit, and I found the words of a sport philosopher, Magic Johnson, and it really resonated with me. In the words of Magic Johnson, all kids need is a little help, a little hope, and someone who believes in them. And I think that really summarizes what it's all about. Every child is a child is a child. The children are Israelis. The children are not the asylum seekers. The children have been born here. The children need to have all the future in front of them. So we've heard tonight from a wide array of speakers, all shedding light on the 10,000 statusless children living in Israel. We've heard about the parents' difficult journey in the quest for a better life. We heard of the limbo within the families, within which the families live. We got a glimpse into the grim reality of the babysitters, the only available daycare for almost 80% of the children, the only available daycare. Yuda shared with us the challenges a bit of running an elementary school solely for children without status. And Sima shared with us the emotional journey of a mother doing all that she can under difficult circumstances for her children. And she has amazing children. The challenges of the children and the families are facing are ever changing, and they need dynamic solutions. They change when policy changes. They change in face of a pandemic. They change in face of war. They change as the children grow, and they change as the families move to other cities. Today's biggest challenges, as we see them in Elifelet, are supervised childcares, the need for developmental evaluation so that children with special needs will have those needs answered, emotional and developmental support, safe and enriching after-school programs so that children like that child that spoke in the video will not have to be home alone watching television until the evening, waiting for his mother who's working long hours. Looking ahead, we see tomorrow's challenges. We need to assure that these children are integrated into middle schools and into schools around the city and around the country. We need to help so that it is a good and safe and positive integration. We need to help bridge the intergenerational gap. The parents born in Eritrea, born in Sudan, the children born here, we want to make sure that they grow up together and that there is mutual language and understanding. We need to think about opportunities for the children post-high school. We need to make sure that they have the opportunities for civil service, for college, university, or for vocational training. And we need to grow together with the children as they become adolescents and figure out their body, their relationships, world around them, and give them the tools for that. Elifelet chooses to be where the children are. We choose to be where the children are right now while working for a better future for the children. That is why we have a staff and almost 40 volunteers working within the babysitters. That is the project that Noah runs. I think we've reached now 37 volunteers working within the babysitters, all trained, all supervised and all doing an amazing job for the children, reaching their heart, as Noah said, so that they can have the right stimulation, they can have the touch, they can have the personal attention. This is why we run after-school programs in the elementary school. And the happy news that we got this week is that the municipality saw the work that we have done in the past year and decided to come in and help us enlarge or increase the amount of after-school programs so that next year we will get to a few hundred children in our after-school programs. In our after-school programs, children are provided with a safe and enriching program. They have a safe haven until 6 o'clock in the evening. They have tutoring, they have violin, as you saw, and clarinet. They have art, they have coding, they have English. They learn Tigrinya so that they can speak their mother tongue, and much, much more. Our occupational therapeutic program is there to meet the children in the schools and after school with art and movement therapy, speech and occupational therapy, and even Canaan assisted therapy. And the children love that. We are planning as an organization to grow together with the children. We want to ensure a smooth transition as they move to high school, as they move to other cities. And we want to be there for the families as well. The parents receive daily updates from our counselors. Some receive food packages if that's the need. Others receive stipends. And others are helped by our caseworker to navigate, as Simla told us, the difficulties of bureaucracy in a strange country. It takes a village to care for a child. It takes all of us. And so we invite you to become part of our village, to become advocates, to become volunteers, to become donors, to help us ensure that these children have a bright future with anything they want to be. Thank you so much for joining us from the US, from Europe, from here in Israel. Tamara, do we have time for questions?
Hi, yes, I think we're going to take a couple of questions now. So we are going to start with one that we got when people registered. And I think we will start with the first one for you, Sharon, which is, how do schools prepare their statusless pupils that are going to graduate from school for the time after school?
So as we mentioned, this is a population that is new and growing. Most children are under the age of 9, more or less. All of the numbers that we're saying here are numbers that don't have any clear backing because these children are not registered anywhere until they enter school. So these are young children, and right now the schools are elementary schools, and the schools are doing an amazing job. And I think that we in the after school programs are trying to really help with whatever it is the children need as far as their studies and as far as their developmental. And later on, we will ensure that in middle school and high school, they are prepared for the world. They're prepared for whatever it is they want to be and wherever it is they want to be.
Okay, great. Next question comes from Larry Tobin in Boston. And he asked, is there any opening to have a conversation about an option for national service in exchange for some kind of status? I'll start by saying something, and if anyone else, if one of the other panelists wants to respond to that. Right now, the public conversation is not really talking about asylum seekers, and for now, that's potentially a good thing. But I will say, as someone who's worked with the community for the last 8 years, things change. It hasn't stayed the same at all. You know, we've had the Hulot detention center, it closed down. There was the deposit law, it was cancelled. Once upon a time, every child was in the babysitters. We did have government investment that set up the UniTough centers, even if that's not enough. So things are dynamic and changing. And I do think that they will get better. And if we talk about, for example, the deportation plan from 2018, the first thing they went back on as soon as there was a reaction from the Israeli public was the deportation of the children. It was very quick between announcing that they were going to be deported and backtracking and say, okay, not the children. So I do think that the children are going to be here and eventually there will be more of a conversation about it and there will be some kind of status because eventually that will just have to happen. That's an opinion though. If anyone else wants to chime in on that.
I agree with you, Tamara. I think things are changing, and I think the civil rights organization and some of us politicians are helping to change reality. We closed the Cholot facility and we stopped the deportation. Myself and member of Knesset Mossi Raz, we flew to Uganda and Rwanda to stop the deportation. So things are changing, but still I think the most important thing is to take care of the social insurance and health insurance and all the issues that concern education and welfare of the community. Status is important, especially because if you get status, you got a health insurance, you got the social security, you got jobs, you got, you know, in the last year in the corona, people that don't have jobs because of the corona were fired because of the corona, get social security or salary per month. And of course, the asylum seekers community in Israel didn't get that. So I think what's important is to give them a social status that they can feel here part of us, and but also have the welfare to live here as good as we can provide. And I think Israel is a strong economic, military, whatever we want, a strong, I hope, democratic country still. So I think we can offer the asylum seeker, the refugees, even the migrant workers, we can offer them a better life in Israel, and this is our obligation. Thank you.
Thank you, Michal. We have a question here from Tesfazge, who asks us, does Elifelet work with refugee kids residing outside of Tel Aviv? I'll pass this one to you, Sharon.
Yeah, so as I answered on the chat, Elifelet has started in southern Tel Aviv because while singles have moved out of the city, most families are still here. But as families begin moving out, so will Elifelet. Elifelet will slowly, and already this year, we're starting to work with Rehovot, and we will help other cities as well, so that the families are able to find their place and find all the needs for their children as well as they can.
Okay, next question. I think maybe Yehuda, you can address this one, which is, how can the municipality assist in the field of education and particularly in special education? And what areas and issues do the difficulties and needs of children and families exist?
Okay, I will try to answer it shortly. Because of the fact that the kids doesn't have a health insurance, they cannot be they cannot go through the exam that will say if they are special needs or not. And therefore they won't be familiar as special needs, and they won't get the budget for it. So it's very simple and very cruel. You can look at this like this. This is my answer.
Thanks. Okay, we have one more question, which comes from Tina Silva, who asks, do you think the children will carry over their developmental problems when they immigrate to Canada? Does anyone want to take that question?
No.
Well, the shortest answer, I think, is yes, they will. The developmental gaps that the children have are in so many fields: emotional, behavioral, cognitive, motor, language-wise, and it's something that is very hard to fill in those gaps. And I'm sure Yuda can tell you how hard it is to get so many pupils with a lot of developmental gaps. I see it every day in the babysitters. You need to work a lot and invest a lot in order to develop the gaps that has been created in the first 3 years of life of growing in a babysitter. And unless they will, I'm not sure what are they getting in Canada, and maybe they're getting very good education, maybe they have smaller classes, maybe they put them with more staff or teachers, which are the things that exactly should have happened here in order to fill in those gaps. So they might be able to help them develop, but better. But it takes a lot of work.
Thanks, Noah. As I said earlier, and I think it's also really responses to this question, is that the time to intervene is now. And disadvantage often becomes something that goes from generation to generation. If we talk about this community, we talk about parents of amazing resilience. They are the people who, many of them were political activists in their countries, many of them were very involved in standing up for the rights of their communities, whether in Darfur or, as you heard from Simrat, who spoke about speaking out about the rights of women. And they're amazingly resilient, and no one helped them when they arrived to Israel. You know, there's a community of organizations that we work on their rights, we work on education, we work on health, but the very basics of getting a job, finding an apartment, starting life, everyone did for themselves. This is a self-sustaining, self-supporting community as well. But right now, we're not setting up the kids to succeed. And that's what we need to change, to make sure that they don't fall into a chain of intergenerational disadvantage. We are working as much as we can, but we have more kids and more families to reach, and the time to reach them and intervene is now. So thank you all so much for being here with us. Please be in touch if you have ideas, connections, if you want to work with us to make more programs and reach more kids. Be in touch with us. And thank you again so much for being here. And thank you, of course, to all of our amazing panelists, Michal, Yehuda, Simrat, Noah, Sharon. Thank you all. And Julie, thank you all.
Thank
so
you,
much.
Tamara.
Good night. It was an honor.
everyone.
Good night.
Good night. Thank you.